All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Ooh, exciting.
I am pumped for this.
Me too. This is going to be fun.
This time of year, we got to talk about Halloween, right?
We have to. It's unavoidable.
It's unavoidable, and honestly, I bet you think you know a lot about Halloween.
Yeah, probably more than we realize, right?
More than we realize, but...
Lurking beneath the surface?
Lurking, right.
Yeah.
So much there, and... Lucky for us, we have this Wikipedia article on Halloween.
Perfect source.
Right, like a whole treasure trove of info, and we get to, pull out the best parts and...
The spookiest bits?
The spookiest, the most interesting, the stuff you probably haven't even thought about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so basic level, Halloween, October 31st.
Take that off the list.
We got that, but then things get a little more interesting because the article mentions this whole All Hallows Eve thing, which I'm guessing most people have heard of, but then it goes a step further and talks about All Hallowtide. Yeah. Which I'm like, okay, what is All Hallowtide?
It's great because it gives us that context, right? So when we're talking about All Hallowtide, we're thinking about a 3-day kind of observance in the Western Christian calendar. And it begins with All Hallows Eve on October 31st, which is what we know as Halloween. And then it continues on to November 1st with All Saints' Day.
Right.
And it concludes with All Souls' Day on November 2nd.
Gotcha.
So it's this time to remember and honor the dead, the saints, and martyrs.
Really interesting because it's like on the surface, costumes, candy.
Total opposite.
Total opposite. And then you have this deeper meaning.
Right, exactly. And it's got those kind of roots in remembering those who have gone before us. But then it gets even more interesting.
Well, yeah, because then we get into the whole pagan side of things.
I do.
Right? Because you can't talk about Halloween without talking about that. And specifically, the article mentions the Gaelic festival of Samhain.
Samhain always comes up this time of year, and it's no surprise. I mean, there are definitely some overlaps.
For sure.
In terms of when it happens and the kind of themes. But there's this ongoing historical debate.
Right.
About the connection between the two.
Yeah.
You know, on one hand, you have people who are like, absolutely, Halloween is just Christianized Samhain.
Totally.
The early church just took what was already there and kind of put a Christian spin on it. But then you have other scholars who are like, no, Halloween is a totally separate thing, a purely Christian holiday from the get-go. And they say that any connection to Samhain is way overblown.
So who's right?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's tough because with history, sometimes there's no perfectly clear answer.
Right.
The Wikipedia article actually does a great job of kind of presenting both sides of the argument and showing that there's evidence to support both theories.
It's a real Halloween mystery.
It is.
Trying to figure out what the real story is.
I think the takeaway, though, is that regardless of which theory is, right, our modern version of Halloween that we all know and love is this amazing blend of influences, centuries of traditions and beliefs all mixed up. And I think that's probably a big part of why it's still so popular today.
For sure, it's like this weird melting pot of
exactly, a hodgepodge.
A hodgepodge, and somehow it works.
And somehow we love it.
I know, right? And when you think about it, it's kind of wild how a holiday that's all about dressing up and getting candy has these deep roots in life and death and remembering people.
It is pretty amazing when you put it that way, and it gets even creepier when you start digging into those old school Christian customs around All Hallows Eve.
Oh yeah, what kind of stuff are we talking about?
Remember how we were talking about All Hallowtide being a time to prepare for All Saints' Day? Well, a big part of that was something called All Hallows Eve vigils.
Okay, vigils. What were those?
So basically, people would gather together on the eve of All Saints' Day, and they would have these intense prayer sessions, really reflecting on life and death. And some people even fasted as part of the observance.
Wow. So not exactly a party atmosphere then.
No, not at all. It was serious business, a time for deep spiritual reflection and remembrance of those who had passed on.
That's so interesting, though, because you don't really think about that side of it now.
It's true. It's definitely evolved a lot over the centuries.
It has. And speaking of remembering those who have passed on, I found something else in the article that I thought was pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah? What's that?
So it turns out Christians weren't the only ones with special traditions for honoring the dead.
Right. Like what?
The article talks about this ancient Roman festival called Lemuria. Lemuria, and get this, during Lemuria, people would try to appease restless spirits, like actual ghosts.
Whoa, that's kind of spooky.
Right, and apparently they were big on beans. Like, they would offer beans to the spirits.
Beans?
Beans, that's what it said.
That's wild. I mean, I guess every culture has their own thing.
Exactly, and it makes you wonder, like, what were they thinking?
I know, right? Beans.
Beans. But anyway, speaking of traditions involving spirits and food, we got to talk about souling.
Souling, what is that?
So you know how we have trick-or-treating today?
Yeah.
Well, souling was basically the ancient ancestor of trick-or-treating.
Seriously.
Seriously. So back in the day, often poor people, especially children, would go door to door offering prayers for the dead in exchange for little treats called soul cakes.
So it's like trick-or-treating, but instead of candy, they got soul cakes and prayers.
Exactly. It's amazing how things evolve over time.
It really is.
Although I gotta say, some of those old school Halloween traditions were kind of creepy.
Like what?
Well, for example, the article mentioned people carving turnips with candles inside and putting them in their windows.
Oh, wow. So like the original jack-o'-lanterns, but with turnips?
Exactly.
Turnips are a lot less friendly looking.
Right. Can you imagine walking down the street at night and seeing all these creepy glowing turnips staring at you?
No, no thanks.
And the article even pointed out that nobody's quite sure what the carved turnips were supposed to represent.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some people think they were supposed to represent the souls of the dead, while others think they were meant to scare away evil spirits.
So it's like they couldn't decide if they were trying to welcome the spirits or scare them off.
Right. It's giving very mixed signals.
Very mixed signals. And you know what else is kind of creepy?
What's that?
In some places, people actually believed that the dead came back home on Halloween night.
Get out of here. Are you serious?
I'm serious. They would even set places for them at the dinner table, just in case their dearly departed relatives decided to drop by for a bite.
Oh, no, thank you. I can barely handle unexpected dinner guests, let alone ones from beyond the grave.
Right.
That's a whole other level of awkward.
Totally. And
right.
Speaking of a whole other level, we've talked a lot about Christian influences, but we can't forget about the Celtic folk traditions, especially Samhain.
Right, Samhain, like the OG Halloween.
Exactly. The article makes it pretty clear that Samhain plays a huge role in the whole Halloween story.
So tell me more about it. What was Samhain all about besides, like, bonfires and fairies?
Okay, so picture this, Samhain was a time when the veil between the worlds was at its thinnest a time, when the AOC, those powerful beings from Gaelic folklore, roamed free.
Okay, hold on. AOC, what are those?
Basically, they're kind of like fairies, but not always the cute and cuddly kind, more like powerful and sometimes even dangerous supernatural entities.
Oh, wow. Okay, so not your average Tinkerbell then.
Definitely not. So during Samhain, people were on high alert for these AOC.
That makes sense. So what did they do to prepare besides, I'm guessing, hide from these AOC things?
Well, they weren't just hiding. They had all sorts of traditions. One of the biggest ones was bonfires.
Okay, bonfires. I can see that makes sense.
Yeah, and they weren't just for warmth either. People believed that bonfires had protective powers, they could cleanse the air, and even offer a glimpse into the future.
Well, wait, a glimpse into the future, you mean like divination?
Exactly. Divination was a huge part of Samhain, and it wasn't just for kids either. Adults took it very seriously.
So, like, what kind of divination are we talking about?
Well, one popular method involved apples.
Apples?
Yeah, apparently if you could peel an apple in one long strip without breaking the peel would reveal the first letter of your true love's name.
Whoa, that's intense.
Right, talk about pressure.
No kidding. I'd much rather just bob for apples.
Me too. But as interesting as Samhain is, the story doesn't end there. We need to talk about how this Celtic festival crossed the Atlantic and landed on American soil.
Right. How did we get from ancient Celtic traditions to the Halloween we know and love today?
It's a fascinating journey, and it all comes down to immigration.
Right. Like you said, they brought those traditions with them when they came over here.
Yeah, it's like their own little piece of home.
Exactly. And I guess as more and more immigrants came over and those communities grew, Halloween kind of started to become more mainstream.
Exactly. And then you throw in things like mass media and commercialization, and boom, Halloween explodes.
Right. It goes from this like niche thing to this huge cultural event.
Exactly. Everybody's got their Halloween parties in their costumes.
And of course, the candy.
Oh, yeah, mountains of candy.
Can't forget the candy. But here's what I thought was really interesting. The article mentions how after America put its own spin on Halloween, it actually started to influence Halloween celebrations in other parts of the world.
Oh, totally. It's like this weird cultural boomerang effect.
Right. It's like Halloween went on this round-trip journey, started in Europe, came to America, got Americanized, and then went back to Europe.
Exactly. And now you see Halloween celebrated all over the globe.
It's amazing when you think about it, from ancient Celtic festivals to a global phenomenon.
Talk about a legacy.
Seriously. But before we wrap up, I gotta ask.
Yeah, what's on your mind?
We gotta talk about jack-o'-lanterns.
Oh, yeah, the classic.
The class, but like, what's the deal with them? Were they originally meant to represent lost souls, or were they supposed to scare away evil spirits?
That is the question, isn't it? And the article actually brings up that very debate.
Right.
It seems like there's no definitive answer.
So it's a Halloween mystery.
A Halloween mystery indeed.
I kind of like that.
Me too. It adds to the fun.
It does. And speaking of Halloween mysteries, I was also really surprised to learn that some Christian denominations encouraged people to avoid eating meat on All Hallows Eve.
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, the article even mentioned that there were specific vegetarian dishes associated with the holiday.
Oh, wow. Like what kind of dishes are we talking about?
Well, they mentioned something called colcannon, which is an Irish dish made with mashed potatoes and cabbage.
Sounds interesting.
Right, and of course there were the soul cakes we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah, the soul cakes.
Yeah.
I wonder if those were vegetarian.
Good question. I guess we'll have to do another deep dive to find out.
Another deep dive sounds good to me.
But anyway, all this to say, it's amazing how much history and meaning is packed into this one holiday.
It really is. It's more than just costumes and candy.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our Halloween deep dive.
That was fun.
It was, wasn't it? And a huge thank you to our expert for sharing all this amazing knowledge with us.
My pleasure anytime.
And to all our listeners out there, happy Halloween. And remember, there's a lot more to this spooky holiday than meets the eye.
Stay curious.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.